All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Open Game Data Open Office Hours. So the Open Game Data community is an NSF-funded research incubator group that's bringing together a collective of researchers who are interested in understanding um, human thinking, learning, and decision-making from data generated from within and around games. And we've had two primary goals throughout the course of this process is one, to compile a set of sort of resources and best practices on the way people do things in this space. And then our long-term goal is to turn that into hard research infrastructure that can actually support this process and automate things and give us the ability to share our work in a way that we can all kind of mutually benefit. We have a number of resources that already exist. So we have the Open Game Data website at Field Day Lab at University of Wisconsin is kind of like the prototype of what we envision eventually happening, working across several different groups. And then we also have a Slack channel that we use to coordinate with each other. And then we have these open office hour sessions, which we do sort of bi-weekly, and as a way of sort of capturing the way people actually work in practice. So the way that these sessions generally are meant to work is they're inspired by a set of sessions we used to do in the statistical education research group at Carnegie Mellon, where somebody, usually a grad student or a postdoc, would come to the stats group and just basically ask a bunch of questions of like, am I doing this right? Here's all my R code about how I'm doing. Here's all my assumptions. Here's a with a member of the stats faculty, and they would do that in public. So essentially, it's like going to sit in office hours while somebody else is like talking about a complicated problem that they're working on. And I like to joke that like when I did my PhD at CMU, everything I learned about statistics I learned in those sessions and not in any class I ever took. Um, so it's just really interesting to see the way experts think about problems as they work through them. Some things to keep in mind: the presenters are often showing work in progress publicly, and so that can take some courage and also some consideration that what's being presented may not be final. Our goal here is to help the presenter sort of make progress on their own work, but at the same time, we're trying to be a resource for everybody involved to learn. So if anybody has a question or a topic or an idea that they don't understand or haven't heard of, you can always raise a question. You can always raise a hand and we can talk about it. And with that, I will hand off to Rosie this week.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name is Rosie Killian. I am a data analyst at PBS Kids. I am focused mainly on our gaming business. So I am here today to, if I can share my screen, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Should be enabled, but let me know
Okay.
if
No,
it's not.
it looks like it
Yep.
did. So let me know if you can see it. Perfect. All right, well, I'm here to talk about the current work that we at PBS Kids have been doing, looking at our games metadata and classification. So I will just jump right in. Um, I will say, uh, first off, we're going to talk about sort of the project goals, the starting point, uh, the iteration that we've done thus far, and what we're looking at as far as next steps moving forward. So, within PBS Kids, we found that we were missing some important and analytically useful information about our games. So, we capture the curriculum content of the games, but not really the information on how those games played or what sort of thematic content they have. So, we really felt like this, we kind of called the metadata about our games, could help us to get at maybe why some of our games might perform better than others, or even what games a user might enjoy, given like they also liked certain other games. Uh, so where do we start? We needed a place to start with our game categorization. And while we can kind of like brainstorm on our own and come up with categories, there are already existing systems that have developed a somewhat unified uh, categories that we can use as a starting point, by which I mean digital game stores. So if you look at any of the larger e-stores, so like your Nintendo, your GOG or Good Old Games, you can kind of see that they will have grouped various games into a variety of genre categories. So each store does this a little bit differently, but the overall system is like fairly widely agreed upon, both by like gamers and by publishers. So in the interest of like speeding up this early prototyping, we chose a storefront and basically proceeded with a subset of their tags. Uh, so enter Steam. Among sort of these e-stores or digital storefronts, Steam is a little bit unique because it uses a tagging system that lets both users and game developers add to the tags for a game. So this has kind of created what I've kind of jokingly referred to as like peer-reviewed genre classifications. And this also meant that Steam has an extensive catalog of tags. New tags get added as Valve, the company that created Steam, reviews them and adds them to their database once like a certain number of people have used that tag on a game. And I don't know what that number is, but I'm sure that it's somewhere in the Steam documentation. Uh, so as a first pass, we took those Steam tags, we filtered out any that were unlikely to apply to the PBS Kids games. So this was largely tags for like that only got applied to like mature rated games, or for genres such as like shooters or all of the like associated tags for that. Uh, we then divided these tags into four columns, kind of based on like specificity of the genre and additional like non-genre related informative tags. So the hope with the system was to sort of capture both the broad and specific metadata about the game and the related gameplay. So we did that. We made a code book for it and then began to show it sort of internally within PBS Kids. And we pretty quickly ran into an issue. It was really hard to code for. The multi-level genre categories, they really assumed a strong familiarity with the different gaming genres, as well as like the ways that they're like historically and mechanically related. So a lot of these relationships are fairly like convention based. So, like platformers are a subtype of action games, or point and click games are a subtype of adventure games. Uh, so there was a lot of confusion if you're not super well versed in the gaming space as to how you use this code book. And additionally, our content team in particular wanted to make a clear distinction between how a game plays and what a game looks like. So where do we go? We have this initial code book. It requires a pretty specific knowledge base to utilize. And while the genre classifications may work really well for game stores, that also kind of assumes that every user is pretty familiar with the conventions of each genre, or really they know what their preferred genres are. So for our uses, we needed a more clearly defined system. So collaboration time. We brought in the content team at PBS Kids. So this largely consisted of meeting with them to reaffirm what use they were hoping to get from this system, as well as to get feedback on our existing classification system. We also had them engage in code tests using the existing and then revised categories. Oh, Jesse, yes.
Oh, just could you provide some context on who the content team is and what they do and why it was helpful to work with them?
Yes, thank you. The content team at PBS Kids, it was specifically our digital content team. This is the team that works with the producers to make our games, as well. Yeah. They work with the producers to make our games and are pretty hands-on in the game development for our PBS Kids games. So these were the people who were going to be talking with our developers, and they were the people who were going to be like putting information into our content management system. So, and are ideally the people who would be recording this information for our newer games. So it was important that the system was one that they understand, as well as one that is going to be useful for them as well. Which is why I asked them to do code tests. And they were very gracious and agreed. So that was very helpful in identifying like what pain points we had in our categorization system. But yeah, so it took a couple revisions, but we're pretty both, you know, me over in my data analytics land and content in their producing and dealing with developers land are pretty happy with the current iteration that we have. We decided that there were certain like non-genre information categories about a game that were also important for us to capture. So we created dedicated columns. And this is for things like the number of players in a game, the perspective the game is played in, whether it's like top down or side view. Is the game available in Spanish? As well as like, is there an in-game incentive or reward for playing? Uh, Also, in talking with content, I found out that they tended to conceptualize the games in a much broader view of like, is a game open-ended or is it asking a player to reach some sort of goal? So we added that as well as they felt it was important to distinguish between games that had a very linear structure and non-linear games. So with all this additional information we were gathering, uh, it let us streamline our genre categorization system into what we ended up calling gameplay and theme. So, gameplay describes at the sort of broadest level what general set of common mechanics a game has, while as theme describes the aesthetics of that game. That said, we kept the tags column. It holds any of the additional information about the game that doesn't fit into any of the other categories. So this is information about like if a game has a character customizer, or if there's a specific subgenre that the game falls into, like platformers would go in the tags column. All right. And apologies if it's tiny. Here is a look at the current categorization system that's in use. I know there are some additional columns I haven't talked about. So the learning progression, game progression, and learning mechanic columns are all based on work that Crest at UCLA did for PBS Kids. So they created and utilized this system of classification, and we're actually just continuing to use what they created without any modification. So it's more focused on how the games are set up in service of learning, uh, which is important, but I feel a little distinct from the like mechanics and theme classification that I've been talking about. But still important information, so it's in here. It just didn't get the same like iterative process on the PBS Kids side of things. Oh, whoops. Sorry. Okay. Where to now? Um, so given like all the iteration that we've done, we're pretty comfortable at this point. We're moving on to the next stage of this project, which is we're going to start capturing this information for our existing games catalog. I do expect that there's going to be some additional refinement of the like tags and themes columns in particular. And additionally, we are settling on a system to record this information for new games when they launch. But yeah, I apologize if that was a little fast. But anything in particular as far as questions or anything that anyone wants me to go back to and talk about more, happy to do so.
Could you go back to the table?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, let's sit on this for a minute. Thank you, by the way, for just preparing this and sharing this out. This is awesome stuff. It probably makes sense too to make a note that Travis, do you know Travis Windelharth?
I do not.
Okay, so Travis has been working on some of this stuff too, from a library standpoint. I think that's just interesting to throw into the mix.
No, that's awesome.
And you're basically one step away from Steam, or two steps, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, probably about that.
Yeah, hi, good to meet you. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I had trouble finding the link, and I'm very under the weather today, but I didn't want to miss this. So, um, yeah, Travis Windelharth. I'm at Foundry 10, and we are actually a philanthropy that was co-founded by Gabe Newell, CEO of Valve. And my background is in game metadata. So very interesting. Thank you very much. It's really cool to see. I don't wanna I could talk for a semester with you on this, but it's really cool to see how PBS Kids is working on this. And one of my committee members from the University of Washington actually, I believe, has worked with you all. Maybe Jason Yip. I don't know if you know that name, but he's worked with PBS Kids and stuff before as well. Um, in the Cooney Center, maybe more specifically with them. So,
Gotcha. Awesome.
and sorry, the context that David gave. David's actually on sort of the advisory board of one of the projects that we're working on. We're trying to develop a comprehensive learning game metadata schema that intersects with some other schemas that the gamer group at the University of Washington that initially stood for Game Metadata Research Group, but now it's a much broader umbrella. So we have worked on and are working on a number of projects related to this, but it's very important. So this is super cool to see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'll throw in a little bit of context too. So I'm totally new to the idea of game metadata, like how we describe games formally. Yeah, it's not something I've got a strong background in, outside of being like a player and a designer. And I'm coming around to another project I've got that's MLS funded to try to understand what literature exists around games and libraries. And one of the large banks of literature in that has been library classification systems that have been applied to games as they try to fold them into their collections, both at like local libraries, but also, nationally at like Library of Congress and all the different digital systems that have attempted that. And I feel like the one big takeaway I've got is that there aren't any perfect systems. Like there just aren't. But one of the big goals I think I saw coming from that was this idea of like, well, it's like games are art, taxonomies are not art. Nothing fits into taxonomies by definition perfectly. But what's useful is kind of the big question always. Like, well, what are the useful attributes that we can use? So I'm curious, I'll turn this into a question, but I've got my own answer to it too. But what is the use fundamentally that you're trying to get out of this metadata system? Like at a high level, like why are you doing this and what questions can it answer once it's done? Like digging into your goals just a tiny bit more.
No, absolutely. I think this is going to seem like a really simple response, but it is basically we made this model to try to describe game popularity within our games app. And when we looked at how much of the variability the model explained, it was pretty low. We were like, what are we missing? And we're like, oh, I think that we're missing like, what kind of game is it? We have like the property the game belongs to, we have the age of the game, but we don't have like, how does this game play? Like how would you describe like the content of the game? And we all kind of agreed that no, that's probably a pretty significant amount of the variability that we're missing is what kind of game do we have our hands on here? Like, so it's in part trying to sort of capture more information about the game for explanatory purposes, but it's also, if you have a game that say, a player spends a ton of time with like a platformer game. If you want to try to like have something to suggest additional games for this person to play, it's really helpful to know that it's a platformer because maybe they would want to play other platformers.
Mhm.
So just having that information at all
Mhm.
makes sort of both like explaining the popularity of a game easier, and also like recommending games to players much
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
feasible.
To build on and add on, I used to work with Rosie at PBS Kids. I don't anymore. And so now I everything that I my perspective on sort of some of the goals, but I'm not officially from PBS Kids, so don't ascribe things that I say to them fully. It's an interesting case because PBS Kids is always working at this intersection between sort of what you would call maybe marketing related goals and learning goals. So
Sure.
there's like what's popular with the kids because kids are only going to learn if they like the game that they want to play, right? Or that, we're trying to teach them something. So we do need to understand why certain games are popular, what will get kids interested, why did they play this game for 5 minutes versus this other one for two? Maybe it was because of the linearity and that encouraged more stuff, right? So it's understanding that, and it's just super interesting the way all of this comes together of like, well, what's the content team who is also in some ways like a marketing, they decide like which games get promoted where and that sort of thing, like where on the page they are. They want to know the perspective. I think that the perspective is probably not so important, probably for the learning part. Whereas we're like, okay, well, what's the learning mechanic? So even if we do get a kid to play this game for 20 minutes, like how much do we think they're actually learning from it? Because there are some where, yes, every game has a learning goal, but there are some that are very passive about how you experience that learning goal. So there was one that was like, yes, you learn animal facts, but it's like the animal facts are just kind of spoken at you while you play this game. So we're like, you don't like, okay, yes, you're exposed to it. It's great. And um, you wouldn't be able to confidently say from your behavior alone, like, did you learn? Whereas there are others that it's like, yeah, you have to that's what the constructed response is. You have to build this thing. You have to apply the knowledge that we were trying to teach you. And so then we can probably see how your behavior changes over time. But again, while I love those for learning, do the kids love them for learning? So how do we sort of maximize again, I still say we, I'm not part of PBS Kids anymore. But how does one maximize the interest and popularity and engagement with the learning aspects, and how do we do that? And then, as Rosie said too, there's also this recommendation engine idea. So we want, again, not we, theoretical we, the idea of like a recommendation engine of what kids want, but we also played around with this idea of, in an ideal world, you have a learning engine that is saying, you like these games. We can tell from some of your previous behavior that maybe you're kind of weak on fractions or whatever. We can sort of recommend that you move over to this game that teaches it in this way, and we think you're going to succeed because you like the way that this game plays type of thing, and you'll figure that out. And that
Mhm.
requires so much metadata of figuring out
Mhm.
all these things, as well as, the ability to just online analyze kids' gameplay behavior. But like that's sort of the dream, or that was some of us at PBS Kids' dreams. That was a long way off, but also how can we start collecting that data so that we can start building a model eventually towards that sort of thing? And now I'll stop.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you. Like, yeah, incredible. Thank you. Awesome additional information. Also, we miss you.
Too.
I can actually connect this with another project that I'm aware of and part of, I guess, is that Legends of Learning, that online platform, has a lot of games, right? Like a lot. So we have a proposal in that only looks at 2,800 of them, but they're all math games.
Only.
And they have like, I forgot what their total number is. It's like 9,000 or something. So we've got 2,800 math games that all have teacher ratings, student ratings, and pre-post assessments. And the obvious question is, like, how does liking a game potentially intersect at all with learning outcomes? But that, that's like the first study that we can do like real fast. But then the next thing in that makes it meaningful at all is metadata. So how do we classify the different parts of these games? And then the next layer in, of course, is game telemetry, which is like, well, what's happening in the games, right? Like, what even is it? So I feel like this general, like, we need these data to speak to what a game is.
Yeah.
Because a game is like, you could say it is 40 minutes of instruction, and you're like, well, there's infinite amount of dimensions happening within that. One other little connection I'll make is a project that I've got with Doug Clark in proposal, where we wanted to zone in specifically to narrative and went looking through, what the learning sciences have said about narrative over the last 20 years and found that there were 9 documented dimensions of narrative construction. So we were proposing a project that is going to look at 5 of those dimensions on a scale of kind of like low, medium, high. And that'll come out to 243 versions of a single game that then we're going to use like a Bayesian optimization so that we can run experiments on that with live audiences to find out within one game rendered 243 different ways, what impacts do these different dimensions of narrative have? So that's almost taking like another perspective of this, which is let's zone into one part of gameplay and let's like theoretically explore it, manifest that theory, and then like run a controlled experiment on it. So I just love all these projects are starting to think more than was my game liked, and you can conclude no significant differences in learning, like these papers. It's like, come on, let's go a step up from individual game papers.
Right. I feel like there's this critical mass building with a number of these related projects. Um, I don't know if it would be useful. I definitely have some questions for you, but if it's useful to you at all, you mentioned some things when you were talking about distinctions you needed to make. For example, between, I think you said theme and uh,
Aesthetic?
yeah,
Oh no,
aesthetic
human.
or something. We encountered a lot of those challenges. We created something called the video game metadata schema, but it overlaps a lot of this stuff. I don't know if you want to have a look at those materials, but we also
Sure.
had to like, for example, differentiate. We have 2 genres. We have gameplay genre and narrative genre, which
Yeah.
is, we had to make a lot of those. And we have and when you describe issues of consistency or everybody understanding what a term meant, we developed controlled vocabularies with like clear descriptions of what each of those mean, which is kind of, metadata schema practice. I'll just get the dropping papers over with if that's okay. I'll just drop 1 or 2 more that might be interested you. If not, no worries,
No,
obviously.
absolutely.
But
This is all stuff that we
yeah.
we have run up against and then had to try to figure our way through as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jinha Lee, who is the Associate Dean of the Information School at the University of Washington and head of the Gamer Group, is one of the world experts in game metadata. She was also my PhD advisor. And she's done work on like, why does classification fail? Where does it succeed? We did work on advisory specifically. So you mentioned some things about, okay, where do we go in the recommendation? What do we do from here? There's actually a lot of research. Again, it's focused on more entertainment and hobby gaming and not explicitly like user-centered design toward learning games, but a lot of it is relevant because there are clear appeal factors, we call them, that cut across different types of games, and sometimes there's data and there's models that show clustering around some of those factors. And this is the last one. If you want to, it's a little stale now. Your data is probably more up to date, but we wrote a paper on Steam tags as a classificatory analysis as well, and we
Oh
broke.
no, that's awesome. I'd love to
But
see
yeah,
that.
so we swim in this space a lot, and this is really closely related to this project that we're working on now. We want to come up with this is a final note, something that cuts across platforms. So whether it's a board game or an electronic game, whether it's something from like Field Day Lab or PBS Kids. I played several of your games, right? And also, by the way, it's really I played one recently on noise pollution and on adding numbers on a dice in a house. I was checking those out. That was really fun. Anyway, but we wanted to be able to cut across those kinds of board games, and we're studying educators who, yeah, Dicey Escape. I played Dicey
Yeah.
Escape. This came out last year, right?
I was gonna say
And
that's one of the Odd Squad ones.
yeah, it was indeed. But coming up with like taking all of this work that everybody's doing and we're trying to like figure out the best way because what we want to do is we want to build, with the funding that we have the ability to build a database. And when we think about like IMDb or we think about like alltrails.com is the one I use for motivation, like for hikes. I don't know if you've heard of it, and you can look up all this metadata on the trails, but people list play reports. We want to build a structure that integrates this kind of metadata, but that is searchable and retrievable by educators and caregivers and parents everywhere by these sorts of things so that they can find what they need and where educators can do like play reports, a little bit like trail reports. So that's the full context on like kind of where we're going if it's excuse me, of interest to you at all. But that's like why I didn't want to miss this meeting, despite feeling not so well. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes me ask the question next. Like, has the PBS group published a structure and taxon, like a structure and vocabulary document that's available to the public?
No. So as far as this work is, as far
Yeah.
as for this work, not yet. I know I'm happy like to share what we have, and I have shared, I think up to what's currently available with like up to where we currently are with Jesse.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been like shared publicly or anything yet. I don't, I'd have to, I am not high enough on the totem pole to make that sort of decision. So I'd have to like go ask around as to if we're planning on doing that.
Well, the PBS Kids use case, like I said, is interesting because it's very context specific in terms of
Yeah.
this is what was used, like while PBS Kids has 300 and something games, like also, I don't know how many there are, but you know that thing that like there's really only 5 stories or something. There's really only kind of like 8 games or something like that that all kind of have different flavors. So like there's a lot of dress up games and a lot of this thing. Just which is mostly to say that the scope is also very limited. Because and this has been and all of this has happened in part because of the work that Rosie did share this with us for doing the game logging schema and trying to come up with event codes and making sure that we've like thought of all the things that one would need to be able to code and have a a number or whatever, a system for across different types of games. And so like my experience was very rooted in PBS Kids, and those are like 3 to 5 minute games, and it's very easy to capture all the events. But like there's only one game, I think, with an inventory management system. So like there's whole things of gameplay components that PBS Kids doesn't capture just because of the type of game that's for kids 2 to 8. We're not doing crazy things. The Verzi Slime Store, I think, is an inventory management. It's designed to teach economics.
We might have a whole 2 games with inventory management now because there's the Carl collections, right?
Oh, true.
A whole 2 out of our 300.
Yeah, so it's I think it's really useful, and in part because we made them, but because that they're thinking about like there's the separation between the learning piece and the game piece. There's some like games where those 2 things are tightly, you can't separate them, but then there's others where it is completely separate. And so when thinking about a game system, like when we're thinking about learning games, how are we doing that piece too? Because so like we have some games that I say that it's like you have to eat your vegetables before you can do the dessert. And again, I guess it works and it gets kids to learn some things. But it's like you're gonna play this fun like sled dog dash game, like guide the sled and collect points and whatever. And then here, answer this multiple like these three multiple choice questions that test like make you use your informational text skills or functional text skills. That does it like yes, it's related to it, but like the learning part is this tiny phase, and that
Mhm.
like I watch my kid just like mash buttons to get through it, right? So that they can get back to the fun part. Um, so just trying to think through like how those sort of designs interact with the way that a game is useful for learning,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
or not. I mean, and sometimes, people need different types of games and context for different reasons. And then that's the other sort of interesting piece of all of this is PBS Kids, there are like 8 basic games or something like that, but the different the different shows or IPs present them in slightly different ways and are at different ages. So like you could kind of move through this progression of you start with a Daniel Tiger game about this sort of thing that's focused on whatever word I don't think anyways, the social emotional learning that there's a different label we're supposed to use. And then as you get older, you could do like you're sort of introduced to those concepts. And then you could move to Arthur, which is also social emotional, but the games are more complex and you have to like solve a little bit of different problems. So like you can be introduced to these games, or even like concepts of math, but different formats of the way you're doing it. So like thinking through how all of those pieces can be put together. How do you
Mhm.
reinforce this lesson? How do you go through the introduction? Or exploration, introduction, construction type of
Mhm.
learning journey. Um, Sorry, I get really excited about this. I feel like I lost my point a little bit, but
I feel like that's another place we're lacking um, good definitions. So I feel like I know the science world better than most. And in the world of K-12 science and like middle school, high school science, luckily we've got NGSS, which lays out some skills as well as some topics, and it does a pretty nice job with that. So it gives us like a vocabulary that at least came from practitioners. They were all part of the construction of that. So that's like a pretty cool thing. But then when you start looking into like literature around sequence, they call that learning progressions around that. And of course, they don't line up at all. Like the NGSS can kind of give you that some of the vocabulary you can talk about, but it doesn't really line up with any of the research where you watch kids learn and you document what the progressions are. So there's this big disconnect that happens there. So it seems like when we get into topics and goals, um, it's another place where we want that sequence. We want to understand those sequences. We want to be able to empirically study those sequences. But it's like the vocabulary of where we've got to start. It's like, because otherwise we can't compare across anything. So we've got, a game called Wake that we really thought about learning progressions when we made it, but they're like our own little learning progressions. They're not theoretically accepted, and you could never compare them. You could never say do these 3 jobs in Wake and then go do this other activity because it should connect. There's just too much of a gap there. So I'm not really sure how to think about that problem outside of iterating and just keep on coming up with taxonomies and trying them out and see where they work. How are you going to tag all these now? What's that? That's my next question. Because like once you even have a vocabulary, um,
yeah, what's the
you're
plan, Rosie?
yeah, you're like so then you got to do it 300 times, and then hopefully there's some sort of reliability to that.
Yeah. At the moment, the plan is to uh, have someone who was previously a part of the content team whose like contract with PBS ended come back to perform some of the backfill. And I think it's still going to be a bit of an iterative process. So it's going to be like, hey, go through code these games. I'll look at them. We'll talk about like uh, I will probably also end up coding some of them, and then we'll compare our responses and uh, basically talk about the ways in which we coded the games differently, because I'm sure that's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yep.
Just trying to get, and that was also part of why I had about 6 people on the content team perform a series of code tests for me,
Oh, good.
just to try to um, look at how good our inter-rater reliability was. And then the it also helped to identify areas where that was low, which
Yep.
indicated to me that either the definitions were lacking or we needed to change something about the category. Like there just was a level of uncertainty or just things weren't clear enough about
Mm.
that particular category. Like either it was missing something or really we were like measuring two things there.
Hmm.
And we needed to separate them out. So yeah, that's it it's the sort of thing where it's always kind of an ongoing process because this is uh you know I would argue like largely a qualitative research project.
Yeah, it
Hmm.
has to be,
Um
right?
yeah. So I'm happy. I come from a public health background, so I'm kind of I won't say quite like in my glory, but I'm like, ah, yes, okay, qualitative research now. I both like stats, you know, quantitative and qualitative, both great. Uh, but yeah, it has meant that we have needed like multiple iterations of this system with
Yeah,
like each one getting a little bit more like we'll say cohesive in terms of how everyone rates everything.
yeah. A related question I've got is Luke and Eric and Jesse, how we're trying to come up with this like open standard for
Hmm.
describing game data. How much metadata is making its way into that? Because I know Mechanic kind of had to show up, but I haven't
Yeah.
tracked with the latest and greatest in that effort.
So we've been talking about this a few different ways. Because generally our focus has been more micro than would make sense to be like for the metadata of a particular game. So like we wouldn't necessarily bring in a set of codes because the game is an economics game or whatever, but if it has buying and selling actions, those are going to show up, that kind of thing.
Mm,
Um, and so like a genre could almost be implied by presence of certain sets of codes, but not necessarily enforce it.
mm,
It's kind of the way I think it's kind of shaping up. Another thing at least I've been realizing as part of this process is originally we were talking about like there's like essentially like a similar sort of gameplay taxonomy. Um, but then we've also been talking about we kind of need like a system actions text. So there's almost like there's genres of gameplay, but then there's genres of like system behavior, and those sort of decouple a little bit. Um, and because we need to be recording not just what the player does, but also what the system does, either of its own
mm,
volition or in response. Like that's another thing that we were noticing is a lot of the existing taxonomies, because they come out of education, are very much player does things, system responds. Only so many games work that way. A lot of the ones that PBS Kids work that way, but other games like the system is kind of its own autonomous entity, and you need to kind of capture both things to truly understand gameplay.
Mhm. Every
Um,
immersive sim ever.
yeah,
mhm.
and uh, and so yeah, there's kind of like almost two sort of sets of genre going on at once, and we need to be thinking about all the different kinds of recording.
Mm.
We need to go into that. But we're just starting out on a similar kind of coding task of gonna grab some gameplay videos and have people try to code. Here's the actions that should come out and see if we can get agreement on those. Um, and we will see. We're in the process of getting the interns, so but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and
Ah,
I was just going to throw in like it feels like what Eric was saying there at the end as we're thinking about getting people to do sort of a coding process on a bunch of different games. Like that's been the place where thinking about this sort of metadata has been helpful, just in the sense of we want to make sure that the standards for the telemetry and event logging work across different kinds of game. And that's the place where you actually start talking about, well, what are the different kinds of game? Um, and the login itself doesn't necessarily have to be locked into what's your learning progression, what's your game progression, what's your linearity in every detail. But you definitely want to make sure that you've sort of um, looked at a game from each combination of linearity, learning progression, game progression, learning mechanic. When you look at
Mhm.
all the different combinations and how could that change things, and
Mhm.
you want to look at all those to make sure that this other schema holds up um,
Mm. Yeah.
across that schema across that set of game genre.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Ah, that's going to be a big takeaway for me for this, actually, from the session is the interconnectedness between game metadata and game telemetry data. I really liked that observation that you might be able to have a semi-empirical process looking at the telemetry, the actions that are recorded to define a genre. And then I definitely agree that we need to know that we've got the right inventory of games, that we don't have any gaps when we're thinking about telemetry. I think those are both two ideas I haven't been thinking about at all yet. So that's really great.
Well,
Yeah.
and to note, I think the super important part that it seems like at least both of the teams I've been involved with have discovered is that it's not the genre, or like genre is not the right word. That word is too encompassing of things. And so you need to figure out a way to describe the game mechanic, which is often related to the genre, but not always. And so like that's where we need to separate those concepts, and that's where it's been struggle bus.
Mm-hmm.
Of like when we think about what is the system doing, you could have like five different mechanics within the same game.
Mhm.
Um, so like what like so there's that micro place and yes, the controlled vocabulary. Like that's like and part of the beauty of the logging system, that's why it has numbers, because language is hard. So like we are like putting in this is what this number means. You can give it a label that's a little more meaningful for you in English, but like the computers and the systems that will work with the data are expecting
Mm.
this number code because that's what the number code like
Mm.
represents. That's the concept that this represents, and we don't have to all agree on exactly the same language because basically it's really hard to do that. Um, so yeah, words are hard.
Yeah.
And then I think lots of different people have, yeah, so I'm definitely gonna go read those papers, Travis. I'm like, what is the vocabulary? Half the time I don't even care. I just need us to all use the same word.
We
Like,
should have called the lab Words Are Hard. I like that. That's
The
really what
words
it's
are hard
about.
lab.
Yeah.
Or just come up with some really ridiculous backronym for words are hard.
Yeah, that you gotta make it longer and funky.
This strikes me as an interesting contrast between the video game world and the board game world, because often when people are talking about board games, they'll describe them in terms of the mechanics first,
Mm-hmm.
rather than in some different kind of genre. Like this is a set collection game, or this
Uh-huh.
is a drafting game, or this is a whatever it is. Um, and yeah, so that's and I was just looking up on so Board Game Geek redid their classification mechanism a few years back in response to a work by Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev on they did a compendium of mechanisms um, that inspired the site to kind of rework there and it looks like for games here they're classified by a type and then a category, so like strategy or like economic, but then all of the mechanisms that like go into it. And so there's this hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm a formalist. I joke that, the only difference between a board game and a video game is frame rate. So it's you can use all of the same terms cross. I'm actually in a lot of ways more interested in analog games. I'm very interested in video games too. But you can use a lot of the same language to describe them both. You just have the process intensity that computers are capable of so that you can make it, active games, and that does enable some more mechanics. But I think the goal is interoperability of everything, and just some are be more clustered in one than the other.
Mm.
I think I know the book you're talking about that And it's not on my shelf, it's at home. But there's a good book on board game elements.
Mm. Well, I would love it, Molly, if you were able to share your vocabulary, if that's possible, in a small group.
Yep.
That could be really cool. Just for, I think, just to even have our eyes on it as other work is happening. And then one of the other things to mention too is I know the kind of telemetry team, the whole plan there is to publish like a version 0.1 and get comments on it and have people bang on that, on what happens in the telemetry side of things. I know that's a separate project than game metadata broadly, but obviously they're related. So
Yeah.
I think it would be really great to have some eyes on that when it's ready. Because we're going to try to put like a rubber stamp on something and say, up till now, everything in open game data is whatever you want, and that's kind of its strength. But if you want to adopt some of this language, then a bunch of systems are just going to start working across games, and analysis are just going to work. So that's going to be an exciting phase, but we kind of want to get it right, because iterating on it, slow it hard, and you've got to do it, but let's try to do it the minimum amount of times in the next 5 years.
And that's part of also from the data schema standpoint, like the main driver, at least for me, I don't know if everybody else is thinking about it this way, is ingestion into downstream analysis pipelines. And so like maybe we have a economics analysis suite of tools. It's like you've got buys and sells, whatever your game involves with buying and selling, you plug straight into that thing. Inventory management, whatever, like, and so there's only these sort of like, what is it going to get into such that a downstream pipeline doesn't want to care about the rest of the game. It just wants to care about certain sets of systems exist.
Some
and
little
can it be
visualization
described
of
sufficiently
words.
to allow that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to help out, coding 5-minute videos at one point or another, we will be looking to do that soon.
Yeah, and like we said, Rosie and PBS Kids more broadly has shared a snippet. I think this table snippet of what we're currently working on, but I don't know. We have to be careful with sharing the PBS Kids material. So to share wider than that, we just want to get Sylvia's sign off, Rosie.
Yeah, no, I'll double check, but I think she'll probably be okay with me sharing like the codebook definitions, also because it's not it's not anything that anyone else couldn't do. Arguably, like, the categories and definitions themselves aren't like
it's a very little risk kind of thing.
Yeah.
And sorry, I realized I just called you Molly before. I was looking at the second letter. Your name. That's cool. Chelsea, was this in the stuff that you shared before? I don't remember seeing the actual like code book.
So things I had shared before were about the logging schema. So none of this information was in there.
Yeah, okay, because you just said that, and I was like, I don't remember ever seeing like a code book for
Oh, sorry. For the logging schema, Rosie has shared this. It's in the what is the?
It's buried in the draft schema folder thing in Open Game Data somewhere.
Yes.
I just have a direct link to it.
On a
But I can
post-it
share with you.
with a QR code on your desktop.
Yeah. But yeah, the main thing so far we've been using it for, as to kick off our coding process, is actually helping us pick a test set of games. Because one of our questions is, are we picking a reasonable representative sample of like interesting game systems and mechanics, such that we develop a useful set of codes in the first pass rather than having to like add a bunch later.
Yep.
From
the notes I took, it seemed like that was one of the 3 major goals for this. It was like I caught that one, which is like whenever you're doing an analysis, you need to know what's there and what's not there. And then obviously we talked about like for recommender systems, and then for any sort of models that want to predict anything and explain behavior, it's for that. And it seemed like at the end of the day, those were the three big ones that I caught. Did I miss any?
I'd be kind of curious to see if once you put this in, are you surprised by like the distribution? Like, do you have way too many
Yeah.
of a certain kind of game, or like, oh, there's like a missed opportunity and
Oh,
we need
I'm
more of type
sure.
X.
Yeah.
That is also, they've talked about that, or they had talked about that of like how many platformer games do we even have? And doing that both across because we do have that for learning goals of like this this game teaches fractions versus something else, we have that for that, but we don't really have it for mechanic. And I think the other big thing is doing it within show because like most of the Wildcrats games are platformers. And so that also led to the question of like Wildcrats games are some of our most popular and like longest, like kids play them for the longest time. Is it because of Wildcrats or is it because they really like platformers? So should more shows start making some platformer games or should Wildcrats do some other things like as like have Daniel Tiger teach math because like the little kids love Daniel Tiger. So like I don't think it's the kids want to play with their favorite characters.
Yeah.
Surprise. That was the big finding. So I was like, why are we making whole new shows to teach math? Just have Daniel Tiger.
They want to stay in the world. They
Yeah.
love the world. They love the people there. Yeah.
No, I do expect we're going to find out that we have a somewhat lopsided distribution of game mechanics.
Uh-huh.
This is
Especially in the
very
kids space.
cool. I do have to run. Thanks so much, though. It was great to see.
Yeah. That's great. I gotta go too, but really thank you for sharing
Thank
again.
you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Erik, send me the recordings whenever you
Yes. And to plug the next one, in 2 weeks, we'll have Nick Ballou from Oxford talking about the Open Play Data project. We did not coordinate on the fact that our names are basically the same thing, but they have a really fascinating data set where essentially you could record a bunch of data from people playing games across a ton of different platforms, but it's mostly just start and stop a session. And then a bunch of like wellness measures. And they did this really cool set of analysis of like all these different kinds of things that your gameplay behavior can tell about you. So super interesting, different way of using gameplay data. That I think would be kind of cool to see. So that's in 2 weeks, same time, same Zoom link.
Cool. I look forward to it.
All right.
All right.
Okay. See you around,
Have a good day,
everyone.
everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.